Hey everyone. Before we begin, I would like to say that story number 3 is a personal story and it actually happened to my dad. This was a while ago, but my dad tried his best to tell me the basics as to what had happened. I hope you all enjoy, and let's begin. This took place when I was about 19 years old, and this is something that nobody should ever have to go through. To cut to the chase, it was Halloween night of 2010, and my friends and I had been invited to a Halloween party from a few classmates that was open to pretty much anyone. Kind of like what you'd expect at a block party. I was not the most popular girl in school, so I really didn't know anyone except for the friend I was going with. There were lights, food, music, and they even had a pool in the back, which was off limits for whatever reason. My friend was busy getting wasted with a few guys, and I was that awkward third wheel girl who didn't know what to do. Eventually, I grabbed a couple of beers and went outside to go smoke by some trees, since smoking obviously wasn't allowed inside. So I'm smoking a cigarette and practically chugging my beers by a tree, enjoying that cool October breeze when I look to my left and see some guy walking towards me. I give him a quick wave to say hello and he nervously says hi. At first, I thought he was from the party, but the more I noticed him, the more I began to realize that he didn't look like he belonged here. Most of us were high school aged. This guy looked like he was in his mid-40s or 50s. His eyes were red and his face was pale, and he wore a dirty white undershirt with cargo pants. He walked right up to me and said, "Got any more smokes? I could use one." I reply with, "Sure thing." I give him my lighter and he takes a few puffs and immediately throws it onto the ground and stomps on it. It was a bit unexpected, but I didn't feel threatened. I tell him it was nice meeting him and that I was going back inside to meet my friend. All of a sudden, he tells me to wait and that he wanted to show me something he found deeper into the trees. Now, seeing as I was extremely tipsy, I accepted, and he grabs my hand and we descend into the woods. We walk for about 3 minutes and I could barely hear the music at this point. We then come to a stop. He sighs and he says that what he wanted to show me was right here. Before I could ask what it was, he grabs my arm and covers my mouth tight. I'm trying to fight to get out of his grasp, but this guy was much more bigger and stronger than I was, and being drunk didn't help. I'm trying to scream, but his hand was on my mouth hard, clearly trying to suffocate me. Eventually, he lets go of my arm for a brief second, and at that point, I saw my chance. I turn around and kick him in the kneecap, causing him to fall to the ground screaming. I'm screaming as well, while running all the way back to the party where I saw a few people looking at me with confused looks. I begin to tell them that I was almost groped, and they take me back inside to inform everybody. The host of the party calls the cops, and our Halloween party turned into that of a crime scene. Needless to say, the man was never found, and nothing ever happened like that after that one Halloween night. For a little bit of context, I'm a female and this happened on Halloween night of 2018, and I was working at the wildly popular Spirit Halloween store. It wasn't the best job, but I was struggling financially to keep up with my college tuition and rent, so I really needed the money. With us being the top Halloween store, we were obviously open on Halloween night, and that was one of the nights where I didn't want to work but unfortunately had to. It was me and my coworker Cameron. I was in charge of checking the merchandise while Cameron was our cashier and the store was dead. To cut to the chase, I had been putting a few items in their correct places due to the customers not caring and just leaving them wherever they want. As I'm walking around, I hear the door open and see a very freakishly tall man walk in. I say, "Hello, welcome to Spirit." He gives me a nod to, I guess, say thanks, and then walks around the store. At one point, I'm putting some of the masks in their correct places when the man comes walking in the aisle. I give him a polite smile and asks if he needed help with anything. With a very deep and raspy voice, he says, "Yeah, you can help me by giving me your number." I nervously laugh, trying not to be rude, and tell him that I couldn't do that and that I have a boyfriend. "Oh, well, I mean, he doesn't have to know. I can give you a ride home when you get off work." I tell him no thank you and that I have a ride, but would be more than happy to help him with anything else. He gave me a firm no and then left out the door, clearly upset that it didn't go his way. When I told Cameron about the guy, he was just as creeped out as I was. Cameron, being the good friend he was, offered to take me home since he actually had a car. I gladly accepted and thanked him. Fast forward till around closing time, we clean everything up and I clock out and close the store. While walking to his car, I saw the man in an old Honda Civic staring right at me with a look I can't even seem to forget about. It was the kind of look you'd give when you're angry about something, as if he'd be back for me. I ended up telling my boss the whole ordeal, and he asked Cameron if he could drive me home for the remainder of my time working there since we only had a week left. Seeing as Spirit was a seasonal store, we had only worked for about 2 months. I am forever grateful that Cameron had offered me a ride that day, because I had no idea of that man's intentions. This is the story of how my dad was almost killed on Halloween night. To start things off, my dad had been working at Toys R Us back in 2006 as the store manager. At the time, my family was struggling financially and could barely afford to pay rent, so my dad would constantly be changing his shifts from days to nights. One night, he was scheduled to work on Halloween, and even though they closed early, he was upset as this was his favorite holiday. Now, of course, the night was slow as expected, and there was only one other person in the store besides my dad's employees working that night. My dad had been working upstairs in his office doing his work stuff when he hears glass shatter and one of his employees scream at the top of her lungs. He goes downstairs and sees 2 of his employees nailed to the ground, held at gunpoint by 5 armed men with pig masks on. Before my dad could call the cops or run away, one of the men noticed my dad, and my dad immediately tells them that he was the store manager. 2 of the men demands that he open the registers and hand them the money since he was the only one with access. At this point, my dad is pissing his pants and complies with the men. He goes over to the register, and as soon as he puts the key in, the damn thing doesn't unlock no matter how many times he tried. One of the men had a gun pointed at my dad, demanding the money or he won't hesitate to shoot. Thank God he got the key in correctly, and at that point, he gives them the money and they take off. It didn't take long for the police to arrive and start an investigation. Unfortunately, with this taking place in the early 2000s, the camera footage wasn't so great and police were never able to identify who those men were. My dad tells us this story from time to time, and it terrifies us knowing that our dad could have not come home that night. My little brother was almost abducted. I think about this story every time him and I argue, and I immediately stop yelling at him, knowing that I almost lost him. To start things off, it was Halloween night of 2010. With my brother being 5, I had to stay with him as my parents had been busy giving out candy to other trick-or-treaters. At the time, we had lived in a relatively quiet neighborhood with not many kids around. Most of the people who lived around here were a lot older, so I told my little brother not to expect too much candy and that it was a school night. We had gone house to house, knocking on doors to get candy and had our buckets decently filled. It was starting to get late to the point where people stopped answering their doors for trick-or-treaters, and it was at that point when we decided to call it a night. At this point, there was almost nobody in sight, and all of the other kids had already gone home. As we were walking back to the house, I turn around and realize that my brother isn't behind me. I look around nervously and see him walking across the street, holding hands with someone in all black. Panicking, I run over to my brother and apologize to the man, telling him that he was my brother. The man looks at me with a surprised look and said, "Oh, this is your brother. I'm sorry, he was lost and I was just trying to help him find his way home." I played along and told him that it was fine, but I was legitimately furious on the inside, and I grabbed my brother's hand a little tighter than usual. Once we got to my house, I explained what had happened to my mom, and she called the cops. Unfortunately, there was nothing the cops could really do, but they said they would patrol the area around our neighborhood. Fast forward that same night, the police never found anyone based on the description we gave them. We lived in that neighborhood for another 2 months before finally moving to another state. If you go trick-or-treating this year, I say to you to please watch your children and make sure they are with you at all times.